Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of Combat Room MMA. I think this is my biggest guest so far, former UFC Welterweight Champion and Pride legend Carlos the Ronin Newton. Carlos, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, doing great. Thank you. Family's
So,
good.
you know, how did you first get into combat sports and what pushed you towards MMA specifically?
I got into combat sports pretty young. Martial arts in general, pretty young. Uh, my stepfather taught me karate when I was around 6 years old. Is when I started that, and I came to Canada when I was 9 years old. Got into other martial arts when I was 15. Became national champion pretty young age. And had my first, I'll say, big matchup right when I was 18, 19, 20. Became I guess, bona fide official professional MMA fighter at that age and kept going. All right.
And I gotta ask, how does it feel to be even nowadays, the first Canadian UFC champion and just, yeah, being a champion at such a young age as well, because you're one of the youngest champions in UFC history.
Yeah. Um, it was, I had great team around me, great coaches and mentors, and they prepared me for things well. So I think at the time I was, you know, very well grounded uh, and mentally prepared to do it. Experience wise, I was moving fast, so it was a lot to take in, a lot to stay on top of, and it was a really exciting time. I definitely felt very alive in my youth, and if I could do it all again, that would be great. I miss competing. I miss competing at that level, that intensity, and just preparing for fights and competition was really a lot of fun. It was great being with my coaches and mentors. One of my coaches passed away a few years ago, but they really made it worthwhile. It was really special spending a lot of time with them, and yeah, I would love to do that again.
Was he with you during your, early MMA career?
Yes, yeah. He, one of my coaches, Everton McEwen, he passed away and recently, and he was my coach since I was 16 years old. One
Up
of my
until the
coaches.
end of your career?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So he was a real special, real special man, and yeah, he taught me a lot. His uh, his daughter now is a phenomenal boxer, and she's doing great in international competition. She's doing very well. So yeah,
And
legacy continues.
so were you guys like really close then?
Oh yeah, yeah. He was like my big brother. He definitely 100%. Yeah, and
And
yeah.
I gotta ask, when you were learning, like, as a fighter that you had really good jiu-jitsu at your time, and that was during the early 2000s where jiu-jitsu wasn't too well known and globalized at the time. So how did
Mhm.
how did you learn it?
Um, I think I had a few you know I had some very good coaches and mentors, very good mentors. People that gave me some very critical uh advice, that has served me well throughout my career. Like from Thomas Sharkey to Terry Riggs, even Moni Isaac. Big advice and influence also from Hickson Gracie in just the way he moved and rolled. Being able to train with him a few times was tremendously uh, insightful. And Carlson Gracie and Henzo Gracie, great mentors, in the jiu-jitsu game and learning from them. I got my black belt from Carlson Gracie Senior, as well as the Machado brothers in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And yeah, yeah, they have been a real guidance and constant, example to follow. Especially the Machado brothers, they are phenomenal to this day, and a big part of the community. For me, they're an indispensable part of everyone's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey. If Yeah, everyone should definitely experience their teachings and their approach to BJJ. It's very insightful.
And I got to ask, so like, did you actually go to Brazil to train with them, or were they over there in Canada?
No, that's the funny thing. You know what? A lot of people think I have been to Brazil, but most of the time I met them in Canada or I met them in the US. Yeah,
So,
and
Brazilians, they're flying to Canada. Is that the right climate for them?
yeah, it's cold here right now. There's a lot of snow on the ground. It's like minus 14 Celsius outside right now. So no, not Brazilian, not the not Brazilian weather, that's for sure. But I have young children, and definitely I look forward to go taking them to LA for training,
Well,
and
yeah.
they get in their get in their I guess hours in on the mat. I spent a lot of time training. That's a thing. Sometimes maybe is not remembered. It just doesn't happen on its own. It takes a lot of dedication and time and commitment. I used to, when I was maybe from 16 to 30 years old, 6 hours a day in the dojo,
Wow.
easy, simple. That was a regular thing. 5 to 6 days a week. If I
So,
if I did if I did 7 days a week, I knew something was wrong with me.
if you didn't,
I would force myself out of the gym if I
so
did
was,
7 days a week.
so was overtraining not a thing back in your guys' days?
Oh, but that was 7 days a week was overtraining for me. So I would force myself out of the gym for at least one day. I just made sure. But training 6 days a week, that was easy. That was happened quickly and consistently. A lot of people to work with, motivate. It was easy. Yeah.
So, when you did beat Pat Miletich, he was a very dominant champion at the time. So, what did you see in him to be able to beat him? Because I think he had like 4 or 5 title defenses when you actually broke that streak.
Yeah. Oh, Pat, he's a phenomenal fighter. Their whole camp, phenomenal bunch of athletes. Whenever I competed in the U.S. or in a event that featured them, also, it was always interesting because I was always the one only fighter in my camp. It was just me, my two coaches, and that's it. And one of my coaches was my manager, so it was literally always just three of us. Whereas Pat Miletich's camp always had like 20 guys in the camp, in the event training camp. Pat Miletich, Team Miletich, they built a phenomenal group of guys to train with, and and that's a result of his performance. His performance, tremendous fighter, great athlete, and you know, what I saw in him right off the back was a lot of experience. A lot of guys followed and learned from his experience. For me, being able to beat Pat Miletich was something I knew I could do, but I also knew, you know, for lack of better words, he was the better fighter.
And what was that feeling like when you actually beat him? Because, you look like you were like overwhelmed that you'd actually somehow managed to pull it off. Because you said yourself you only had like 3 people in your corner, like 20 people in his. So was that a bit like a Rocky versus Ivan Drago situation?
Uh, I wouldn't say it was like Rocky versus that. It was definitely experience, a battle of experience. We have one athlete who's very you know capable, I'll say that about myself. I was a very capable athlete from a very young age, but you also have a person like Pat. He has a lot more experience, you know, and also still, very fit, physically on top of his game still. So for me, it was a matter of, I'll say, strategy and persistence. Not being very persistent. I knew, to win that fight, I had to take it to him and force him to, make a mistake, uh, go for the win. Not I wasn't gonna win against him, judge's decision or a draw. Not in the United States against a top American champion like him. I wasn't gonna let that happen. Go to the judges. I knew if I was gonna beat him, I was going to have to beat him. So
So,
yeah.
what was that feeling actually like? Because you made history because becoming the first Canadian UFC champion and dethroning such a dominant champion, what was going through your head at that moment?
At that time, it was like, cool, man. This is I am I'm fighting the some of the best guys in the world. Fighting some of the best guys in the world at the time. You know, the sport wasn't that monopolized, the way it is now, and I had the opportunity to compete against fighters in Japan, all over the world. So I think a lot of that experience helped me in that fight. The fact that I fought in other promotions under a different format, you know, I wasn't I wasn't stuck in my way of thinking about things. I wasn't stuck in my approach or my strategy. I was very flexible, very fluid, with my responses, and you know, it helped me a lot in the fight. And at the end of that match, it really just felt like, okay, this is a nice milestone. Pretty cool. Next.
And, you know, past that, I got asked about the first title defense, that controversial first title defense with Matt Hughes, after that fight, do you feel like you got robbed?
um, Robbed? No, I didn't feel like I was robbed, but I definitely understood how it happened. Immediately after that fight, Big John McCarthy apologized. A lot of the UFC brass apologized, and they realized they made a mistake, and you know, the only person really who didn't know what happened was Matt.
Because he got choked out.
Yeah, he was the only person who didn't know what happened. But while I was holding on to that cage, arguing with the referee, I told him if I let go, we're gonna fall real hard. I specifically said those words: "We're gonna fall real hard. It's gonna be, someone basically emphasizing someone can get hurt seriously because he's passed out on his feet." And Big John said, "If you don't let go now, I'm going to disqualify you." So I said, "All right, let's go for the
So
ride."
you actually remember that right before getting,
We had that
slammed unconscious.
conversation. That was the conversation precisely as that, right on the cage, as I was holding on to the cage. And he said, "Let go, or else I disqualify you." So I let go. And then what happened? It happened exactly like I thought it would happen. Somebody got hurt. It was me. I got hurt, hit my head, and basically, yeah, the way that played out kind of played out the exact same way the whole fight did. He made his move, I went my move, and just trying to stay one step ahead and take it to him. Yeah, Matt was a great. You know, that was a real fun fight for me. A lot of fun. We went on it real good. It was a good match, and you know, I didn't feel like I was robbed or anything like that. I just felt like that was a pretty awesome fight. Not the outcome I wanted, but live and fight another day.
So I gotta ask, so did you actually choke him unconscious and because he was unconscious he just fell down and
Yeah,
you fell with him? Is that what actually happened, or did
yeah,
he
yeah.
slam you at the same time?
He didn't slam me. He took a step back,
And
and
that's when he got choked out.
yeah, he was yeah, right there. but we fell because I let go of the cage. He didn't slam me. We fell because I let go of the cage.
So he was already
It,
choked unconscious, basically.
yeah, if I had stayed holding on, he would eventually went limp, and he would have looked like like I was hanging him. Yeah, but yeah, he basically I the only reason we fell is because I let go of the cage. Yeah.
And I got asked some more of the deeper questions that a lot of fans would be wondering, when you transition to Pride, or back in the UFC early days, there was no drug testing at the time, so
Yeah.
we got asked, when like how many of you guys were on PEDs or steroids,
Me 100%. I was on nothing. I didn't even drink coffee.
uh,
I
what?
didn't even
So
drink coffee. I didn't even take protein supplements. I took the odd protein supplement here and there, but no, I wasn't into anything performance wise. I just at the time I just exercise, eat healthy, take care of my body, and was in university.
I
You know,
mean, if you're training 6 hours a day for 6 days a week, how do you recover from that?
just train smart, not don't do anything stupid. I treated my body, with respect, and it gave and you treat it with respect. It will serve you well. And recovery. I took whatever time I needed to recover. I wasn't. You gotta understand. I trained 6 hours a day, and I went home and I studied. I was in university. Right when I fought Pat
Wow.
Miletich, I flew back home and wrote my fourth year psychology exam, like a day or two after. My
Psychology exam.
university, yeah, my university professor
Oh.
said, "I saw your flight. Beautiful. Here's your test." Boom. And I sat there in the room by myself and I wrote my exam. 3 hours exam.
So
So
where do you,
I didn't imagine me getting beat up and writing that exam. I couldn't. It didn't happen.
so do you still keep your UFC belt around?
It's here. It's in storage. I don't keep my belts or trophies hanging around. That's not me. In fact, I know a lot of my trophies and medals over the years. I gave some away to some of my good friends. Because they really supported me and so forth. And some of them, when I came home, I gave them the trophy. All right.
Wow.
And yeah, and yeah, but when it comes to performance enhancing drugs and all that stuff, that was not for me because I got my whole life to live, that's not just my MMA career. It didn't. The trade off was not definitely not one I would take. Did guys? Did I see people use performance enhancing drugs and so forth? Definitely, 100%. I
So
remember
was
I remember sitting on the mats right beside like Mark Kerr. I remember Mark Kerr pulling out a little can and popping this stuff that looked like tobacco into his
oh, so
mouth.
you actually trained with Marker?
Yeah, and I said to Mark,
Wow.
we're sitting in the mat in the dojo in Beverly Hills. I said to Mark, I go, hey, what is that? He goes, oh, it's GH. I was like, GH, what's that? He
Growth
goes,
hormone.
growth hormone. I was like, yeah,
Wow.
that's how much of it I didn't. That's how much I didn't know about it. I didn't even know what GH meant. I just like, yeah. He said growth hormone. He said, you want some? I said, no. I said, no, not for
So
me,
what
home.
year was that then? Because he eventually like spiraled deeper into more than growth hormone. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I don't. The other stuff I don't know about. I'm just saying, first-hand experience. Yeah, GH. I've seen guys use GH right in front of me. Guys using other stuff. I've never seen anyone popping needles or anything, but definitely there's open conversation about it and so forth. For me, those were the more honest days of the sport. Today, with the UFC monopoly, drug testing is there to make it look like it's a real sport, but the UFC is in control of everything. Guys who fail depending on what they want, they will either get outed or not by the
Yeah.
UFC management. You know, guys will be given warning. Guys will pay a fine and still be allowed to fight. The UFC doesn't have to follow what the athletic commission says. They hold events around the world. If
So,
if any fighter that they want to see fight test positive for drugs, they, they'll think whether they'll use the discretion of whether or not they want to use this for publicity or keep it quiet, or in some cases use it as an excuse to cut a fighter. Throw make an example of them. It's a it's a sport now, that is no longer a sport because it's not free, fair, open, unfettered competitions. It's literally a guy that can. It's literally a guy who controls title fights and decides who, when, where, and what, and for how much you get to fight for titles. It's just
so,
it's just pure slavery now with the fighters.
so was there any, because you fought a lot of legends and fighters across your career, was there any notable fighters that, when you were fighting them, you could feel that they were taking something based on their performance?
Performance wise, guys, it's a very thin margin to be able to tell whether or not somebody's on performance. But I've seen guys who don't take anything perform like they were on everything.
Is there any
they were
notable
just
fighters?
they were just phenomenal. They were just phenoms. I'll say for myself. When I fought Pat Miletich, a lot of people thought, "Wow, you were so ripped." My friends would tell you, my coaches tell you, didn't take a thing. I didn't even drink coffee. Okay, I yeah, I didn't. Yeah, when I said I didn't take anything, I didn't take anything. Creatine was like, meh. I don't even bother with that stuff.
Was
Literally, for
creatine around
me,
back then?
it was just eat healthy, uh, keep your mind active, and do your training. That's it. And I know guys that were taking drugs. I knew they're on drugs. I fought them and I beat them. I didn't need it.
So, you fought some fighters at the time who, at the time, they might have not been like that well known, but, later on in their careers, they had like legendary careers. Like, fought some losses, like fights that aged extremely well, like, Anderson Silva or Matt
Yeah,
Hughes. So, what for Anderson Silva, what was it like fighting him? Because,
Anderson. Anderson was first of all, being in a show with Anderson and being around their camp. They were always fun guys, very friendly. Uh, yeah, I always felt like I had a very good connection with his team and his camp. You know, Anderson for me, one of the few guys I felt was in the sport for the same reasons I was.
was that just to,
The,
enjoy the sport?
yeah, the real, the Bushido samurai spirit. Like we, I could definitely tell we both love that about the sport. Fight, and that was very true. For Anderson's camp, that really rang true. Those guys, they were true warriors. They weren't in there for anything else. They were really, if they had to do it for free, they would. And same for me. You know, if fighters didn't get paid, I probably still would want to be a fighter.
Yeah.
I'll just get paid doing something else. yeah.
What rule set did you actually prefer, Because you fought with UFC and Pride, so which rule set did you actually prefer at the time? Because Pride had like the grounded knees and everything.
It depends on the opponent.
Yeah.
I didn't
Wanderlei
prefer
Silva.
I didn't prefer either one. I definitely preferred to fight in the ring though. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, because
I definitely preferred I definitely preferred to fight in Pride and to fight in Japan. That was the best times.
is it
Yeah.
because the fans, recognized you more with, you like being a fan legend over there?
Even if I wasn't a fan, if I was known completely zero, not even known at all, Japan was just that much better of an environment to compete in. It
What
was
was the
just
reasons for that? Because they're more respectful.
it's just called, yeah, culturally, just eating food, training. It was just, yeah, the how quiet the fans are when you're fighting.
Hmm.
That's pretty awesome. That for me, like, I had some very good fights in Japan where I had some really good groundwork going, some really good groundwork against Renzo Gracie, for
Yeah.
example. I'm telling you, if the fans weren't as quiet as they were, I don't know if those moves would come to me. Because when you can focus and concentrate like that, because the fans are quiet, they're watching your moves as much as you're watching your moves. You're gonna pull off some cool moves,
Yeah.
right?
Do
So
you think
yeah,
one of those like performances, that you're talking about where you had a really good performance was like against Sakuraba?
yeah, and when yeah, it's when fans are quiet and you can hear yourself think, it's it really helps. It does, and yeah, it's just yeah, just dealing with the with fans in Japan also was just really nice. Yeah.
Was there any like Pride fighters that you were close friends with, like you and Kevin Random, and drinking backstage or something?
Um, I knew a lot of fighters. Like me and Bass Rudin, very good friends. All right.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, I've gotten to know a lot of Japanese fighters. I've become very good friends with. I pretty much I lived at Shooto, gym in Tokyo. You
Wow.
know, for almost a year. I lived in the dojo, in Japan. So
Wow.
yeah, I made very good friends with a couple of university coaches in judo in Japan, and also, you know, uh, formed and created great relationships with some of the top coaches in Japan. Yeah, it wasn't just about friends, with other fighters backstage. It went way beyond that for me. You know, and I learned to speak Japanese, pretty well during my fight career, and it was very helpful. Just going out and being able to socialize and listen and hear people talk. Even if I sometimes didn't have the words to say, I often heard and understood what they were saying. And it made for much more fruitful interaction. Yeah, yeah. The fighters backstage in Pride, it was also hilarious because everyone knew they were in Japan, so they enjoyed it. They were having fun.
What was the scariest fighter that you interacted with? Like even if you were never gonna fight him, like even being around him, like you felt intimidated by them.
I never felt that way around any fighter.
Never,
Never.
because a lot of fighters are scared around like
And you
Wanderlei
know
Silva.
what? There was one guy I felt was, wow, that's a vicious fighter, and that was Bass Rutten. Yeah,
Why
that
was
was, I
that?
think.
Because of his
No, he's just a
good
vicious
kickboxing.
fighter, man. He's just a vicious fighter. Bass Rutten in his prime, vicious fighter. He was like a light heavyweight, but you know he could do damage like a heavyweight, but had the ferocity, the viciousness of a lightweight. Yeah, Dan
So
Anderson.
so how
I
come you
mean,
didn't?
Bass Rutten. Dan Henderson, fighter with the biggest spirit, biggest heart I've ever fought. Dan
Did you not
Henderson.
fight him like early in your career, Dan Henderson?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Wasn't he like an Olympic wrestler or
yeah,
something? So
yeah. He went to the Olympics. I believe he won a silver medal in freestyle wrestling in the Olympics. But in terms of heart and spirit, Dan Henderson, of all the fighters I've ever met, had the most. Yeah.
and how come you never ended up deciding to settle in Japan since their culture and lifestyle, suited you more as a fighter and as a person?
You know what? I could have. I think I probably came very close to doing that many times. You just,
Many times. Wow.
yeah, life is funny. I ended up starting a family in Canada. That was the only reason I stayed in Canada.
So
If
if you
I
started a family in Japan, you just stayed in
ah
Japan.
yeah, that would be in Japan. If I started a family in Australia, I would be in Australia. Yeah, I was pretty mobile, pretty free, and you know, whoever the lucky winner is, it's not up to me.
So how come you actually ended up deciding to retire? Cause it's because, fighters back in the day, they took a lot more mileage because nowadays fighters retire much later, but you actually retired, quite young as a fighter, I think it was 33 or 34. So,
Yeah, for me,
well,
at 33, I had my first kid, so I really family and all those things became more important, and also around that time, I started my research into starting the antitrust class action suit because I also realized the sport is not a competitive sport. They are dictating the way the sport is structured. It allows the promoter to dictate or promoters to dictate every aspect of the sport. And the fighters, the athletes aren't actually competing freely and openly like athletes would in order for other service providers in the sport to have to compete also. They are actively preventing that freedom of the athletes to compete for any title in order to prevent other promoters or even managers from competing against them and doing their job. You know, it's for me that was a big part of me saying, nah, there's I'm gonna use my business acumen to start other businesses, do other things, and at the same time too pursue the litigation and the remedies to fix the sport.
so, what was that UFC lawsuit about? What was like, summarized, what was it all about, the reasoning behind the lawsuit?
The lawsuit was, I basically sued them for antitrust violation for being uh, anti-competitive practices, and that has allowed them to establish and maintain a monopoly. By using that monopoly and maintaining that monopoly, they are able to grab and confiscate confiscate
Confiscation.
a majority of the revenues that are produced by the athletes competing for themselves unfairly, unjustly.
So you
All
think they
right.
should, split the revenue more equally between fighters and the
It's
actual
not even
company?
it's, it's not even about splitting. The problem is there's no bargaining power, no negotiating power because they use exclusive contracts for athletes to compete for titles. And it's a thing that if all the promoters are allowed to do it, one promoter, if they spend enough money to do so, they can gain a monopoly. The UFC willfully did that. And by willfully doing so, they have taken away, removed from the market the force that will allow the money to be split up more equally, meaning fighters bargaining for themselves and promoters having to negotiate and basically outbid other promoters. There's no bidding process in MMA because they sign you to an exclusive contract to compete only for their title. That's not allowed in any other sport. It is. It has been found illegal. It has been found illegal in league sports. It's illegal in boxing. It's illegal in other sports like tennis and so forth. Right? There's no sport in the world where the promoter owns the title rights, the rights to the sport, the name of the sport. They never call it MMA. They
They call
only
it
call it
UFC.
they only call it Ultimate Fighting, where they own the name to the sport and have exclusive contracts with the athletes, meaning these athletes cannot compete in any other sport. It's totally garbage. All right, so that is the way they establish and maintain a monopoly. And I said, you can't do that because when they control rank and title and who, when, where, and how much you're going to fight for, they control everything because you know how they do it through advertising, through propaganda, through promoting their name in TV commercials and so forth to control you, the consumer who watches it and
Yeah,
will believe whatever they put on there. It's kind of like, is Hulk Hogan the best champion in professional wrestling? Was he the best? Like, was he the best? It's kind of a funny question because professional wrestling is not real, but
yeah.
everything about MMA, everything about the way the UFC does things, it's like professional wrestling.
In terms of entertainment wise
Yeah,
and putting on fights.
in terms of crafting, they put together the matchups. Everyone knows what they want. Everyone knows what they want. So even managers, judges, referees will act a certain way for them. The referees are biased towards who they know Dana wants to win.
So, you were talking about the boxing league and MMA promotions and how they uh give fighters, more chances based on their popularity. So, do you want to speak more about that?
Yeah, well, first, the word league. There is no such thing as a boxing league or MMA league. Leagues are made up of teams of individual promoters, that have a team, and those teams by necessity have to work together in order for the competition to exist. There's no such thing like that in prize fighting or in any other sport where there's no fixed season or fixed schedule, where there's no fixed teams. you know so league is something they use to distract the public and to fool people into thinking what they're doing is legal, and when it's
Yeah.
not. You know, the drug testing, the anti-doping, like they do, is to fool people into thinking it's legal. You know, there was a time in the U.S. when they used to test professional wrestlers for performance enhancing
I
drugs.
think that was in the
When they,
1980s.
yeah, when they realized, oh, why are we testing these guys? It's not a real
Everyone's
sport.
on steroids.
you know, it's not a real sport, and we're in the same time now with MMA. It's not a real sport the way it's structured. The guys aren't actually competing. It's structured just like professional wrestling, except the guys hit one another for real, and if they win, the promoter decides whether or not they go on. And sometimes, even if they lose, the promoter says, "You know what? You're still going to go on." You know,
So do you think it's like nowadays, the rankings, they don't mean anything and it's more based on popularity than
yeah,
rather how well you
they
perform
don't
as a
mean
fighter?
they don't mean anything. Yeah, when the fighters aren't doing their own matchmaking, deciding who they fight, when they fight, and where they fight, and for how much they fight, those rankings don't mean anything. When the promoter is in control of rankings, they don't mean anything. Don King had to bribe sanctioning bodies in boxing in order to control rankings. The way MMA is structured, where the promoter is the owner of the title, they don't have to bribe anymore. They do whatever they want.
And when you were competing professionally, was it any different compared to how, monopolized it is now?
When I was competing professionally, the structure was the same. But it took time for the monopoly and the antitrust violation to really take hold and the monopoly to solidify itself. Now it has really solidified itself, but it started out from day one. The way the structure is, where a promoter has their own title, it ends in a monopoly by default. Because if you are the one that owns the title and we are the athletes, it's necessary now for all of us to be competing for the same promoter in order to compete against one another for the same title. That's why this doesn't exist in any other sport. The titles are always kept separate. So then
Yeah.
you don't have to be on the same team in the NFL for the rest of your life or on the same team as every other football player in order to play for a title. No, you could change teams and still
Okay.
play for the same title. In boxing, promoters aren't allowed to own titles. They're not allowed to control titles. So in boxing, you can change promoters and still compete for the same title and move
But
and
for
compete.
MMA, it's just they own the titles and it's not
Yeah,
like universal.
yeah. So that when the promoter owns the title, by necessity, we now have to compete for the same promoter. If me and you want to compete against one another for the same title, if you
Yeah.
want my title or if I
I
want
gotta
your
come to your
title,
promotion.
I have to go to your promoter. And then
Yeah.
that's when your promoter then dictates to me the price
Well,
instead of them having to compete against other promoters for the best price.
but if the UFC just like what they've been doing now with buying every promotion and monopolizing MMA by buying all the big MMA organizations, have they not just essentially done that?
Yeah, and
By
that's
your
exactly
committee.
it. So even if you say no, the problem with a promoter being able to own and control a title and have exclusive contracts, they now have the option, even if you say no, they have the option now to either drive your competitor out of business or buy them. And the old boss is now the new boss is the old boss. Yeah.
So do you think instead what they should do is like each company has their own MMA organization, but they're allowed to the fighters are freely allowed to like fight across
Yeah.
the organizations?
That's they it should be like tennis. In tennis, promoters in tennis have their own titles.
Yeah.
Wimbledon, Australian Open, but tennis players move freely between all the different tennis promotions to compete for titles. And that's how the tennis players make the most money out of tennis. And that's how all the tennis promotions, there's like 10 big tennis titles in tennis,
Yeah.
and that freedom of movement for the athletes to compete allows the other promoters to compete against one another, allows the promoters to compete against one another.
So you
MMA competition doesn't exist.
so when you actually, had that big lawsuit with the UFC in the 2010s, what was the whole reason behind that lawsuit and how much in compensation did you guys actually end up getting?
The whole premise behind that lawsuit was what I basically just explained, and the judge basically stating there is no business acumen, no business expertise to what they do. They on purpose use structure and and financial power to obtain and maintain a monopoly, by buying rival promotions, putting them out of business, or operating them as their own. And
Yeah.
that's why it's not allowed in any other sport. It's just it leads to a monopoly, concentration of power, and monopoly, and from there competition breaks down. There's no free competition, no fair, open, unfettered competition between athletes, which prevents promoters from competing in general. They turned it strictly into entertainment, and the judge saw it as that, and instead of going to trial to present the evidence, the UFC settled out of court to avoid the trial because
Because
they
they thought
know,
they knew.
yeah, they would lose, and the evidence will also be very bad, and also the judge will implement new rules and regulations that will prevent them. But by settling, they were able to avoid all that and move on with their plan. Their plan is to do the same structure now in boxing, and it will destroy boxing.
And do you think if you and Dana saw each other in public, you'd get along or, a bit of a
Ah,
scuffle, man?
I'm sure. I'm sure we would get along, and I'm sure Dana would smile. I'm sure Dana would say, "Haha, you're a smart guy," because
So does
he
he
knows I
personally like,
understand it.
does he personally like not like you because, you're against the UFC's monopolization?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say he doesn't like me or anything. I'm sure he likes me just fine. He's just fine with me. It's just this is what they're doing. This is what they're doing. And if you don't stop people from exploiting you and taking advantage of you, certain people will exploit and take advantage of you. It doesn't
And
mean they're right.
didn't fighters from like your generation get compensated
Uh,
because it was found that the UFC was
yeah,
underpaying them or something?
yeah. A lot of guys got compensated. Anderson Silva, I believe, got the most compensation of any fighter, and that for me, that's like very rewarding to see. Basically, the judge reward the settlement was agreed to be 375 million they
Just
paid
for the
out.
fighter purse, like for
Yeah,
compensating the fighters.
Yeah,
Wow.
375 million paid out among 1,200 odd fighters, just under 1,200 fighters, and which is a lot of guys. And yeah, I believe Anderson was one of the biggest payouts, and I'm sure there are some other big payouts in that amount too.
So
But
are you allowed to personally disclose, how much you got compensated or
you're allowed to disclose it and so forth. Me, I did not get anything. I'm
you
outside the
didn't?
yeah, I'm outside the statute limitations. But for me, it was important to do the case. It was important to start the litigation and seek out the remedies because this is for the next generation of fighters. This is for the current generation of fighters, and this is for my kids who are have the potential to be fighters. That's the thing. A lot of people don't understand. Prize fighting, MMA is still too young, but in boxing, it's very self-evident. It's a
Yeah,
generational sport. You know, fathers pass down, the skills to their
yeah,
sons. Mothers pass down the skills to their daughters. And vice versa. You know, mothers pass down the skills to their son, and fathers pass it down to their daughters. And you'll see, boxing, there's generations of families that compete. Floyd
yeah.
Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather is probably the third generation of his family to do boxing.
So would you want to pass that down onto your kids and get them involved in MMA or boxing or something
Oh,
like
my
that?
kid's training martial arts. My 4-year-old is going to martial arts tonight. Right? And that's the thing. If you don't challenge this type of impunity and corruption in sport, it's going to keep happening.
So would you want to see him like fight professionally as an MMA fighter?
Um, if he's good at it, sure. If he's not good at it, no. Yeah. My mom told me, MMA, being a professional fighter was not her first choice for me, but she enjoyed watching me compete, and she was happy that I was good at it, and happy for me that I enjoyed it.
So what were you planning on becoming initially, before you decided on becoming an MMA fighter?
Oh, I went to school for different things. I thought about engineering, medical school, and so forth. I went to school, did psychology, linguistics, and logic, and that's my university background. And outside of that, uh, first journey, I went back to I went back, did more schooling, and studied architecture, a little
Oh,
bit of engineering and architecture, and now I design and build buildings and homes. That's our family business.
so is that
Like,
what you've been doing post-retirement?
yeah, that's what we do now. Basically like I'm a small time developer.
And when you actually did end up retiring at the age you did you ever think about, coming back to the sport for another fight?
Oh, I think about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do. I still think about competing a lot. It was very exciting stuff, and
Even at this age.
yeah, yeah. But again, fixing the sport, making the sport competitive, and making the business environment of the sport
Yeah.
grow. You know, that's probably the thing I feel I have to do first before really taking any idea of stepping back into the octagon, the ring, the cage, whatever you want to call it. Seriously, definitely not the octagon because yeah, yeah, I believe what they're doing is going to not benefit me in any way,
Yeah.
really, and I would be doing a disservice to the sport by taking part in it.
And during your MMA career, uh, out of all the opponents you faced, which one do you think had the best or highest fight IQ?
Like I said, Dan Henderson. That guy
Really?
was, yeah,
I
amazing
thought you were just
athlete.
a bit
Hell
of
of
a,
a
throws it
fighter.
overhand right or just takes you down.
Nah, he he he's got a good basket of skills, and he's got good heart, good spirit, and his yeah, and technically. Very, very solid. It's very
So what
solid.
surprised him the most, I mean, what surprised you the most about him during the fight?
With Dan Henderson,
Yeah.
um, not so much during my fight. He surprised me during his other fights. Yeah, yeah. But
What later
again,
on
too,
in his career, his longevity. Oh,
yeah, he his career and his evolution, amazing. Yeah, he really evolved. He's
in
a
what way?
guy that from the start of his career to the end of his career was that he became a completely different fighter.
Yeah.
You can't say that about a lot of fighters.
Because towards the end, he relied more on his striking
Yeah,
compared to his early days. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Very few fighters you can say that about. Very few.
And when you fought Sakuraba, um, how much did you practice for that fight? Because you guys like in Pride is considered one of the best uh jiu-jitsu fights, like basically ground fights ever. With all the scrambles and all that. So
Yeah.
how did you prepare for that fight?
Um, like Bernard Hopkins told me the other day, uh one of his favorite boxers and one of my favorite too, was Hearns. I don't get ready, I'm always ready.
Mhm.
And I was that way when I was young. I was always training. I didn't have to prepare. I didn't have to get in shape for that
Yeah.
fight. I
So
was
were you in
already
camp?
in
Were you in
shape.
camp all year round?
Yeah, I was already in shape, ready to
Mhm.
go. Yeah, those are the days as a young man. I didn't have any other responsibilities or not too much. Literally, almost zero baggage. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of possessions. I could easily go. My friends could call me and say, "Hey, you're coming to Israel to train? I'll go there for 6 months and train on a day's notice." I could do that. I can't do that now. I have a house. I have family. You know, so
Yeah.
yeah, I would have to get ready. Now I would have to get prepared. Back then, I was in the gym 6 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week. Yeah, always prepared.
So thinking back, what did you miss most about fighting professionally? Was it the training, the fights, the feeling of winning? What did you miss the most about it?
Training. Training was awesome. Rolling, training every day. I probably could roll for 6 hours straight. Now I could. But back
Six
then,
hours now.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, now I wouldn't want to do that because I'll be thinking,
You need
oh, who,
6 weeks of
yeah,
recovery after that.
no, it wouldn't. I wouldn't even need 6 weeks of recovery. It's just I have other interests. I have my son, who's looking after my kid, who's raising and teaching my kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I, I, and the what I want to do with my time and energy is has a lot of competing interest now. So back then there was no real competing interest, except for maybe the odd girlfriend here and there, which my coaches always were very good at keeping under control. And yeah, I didn't have many distractions. I was pretty disciplined. Yeah.
And there's a legendary, press conference where it's you, Anderson Silva, Fedor Emelianenko, Kevin Randleman, Rampage Jackson, and all those fighters, you're all on stage together, Did you recognize at the time, how legendary that looked like at the time or later on?
Probably not. Probably not. But yeah, it's all good. I took it all one step at a time. It wasn't probably didn't think of it too much. Um,
And
yeah. Well, yeah, it was great meeting and hanging out with the guys, and again competing and so forth, and a lot of great memories and a lot of great people. Some guys I still see time to time, especially with the Mixed Martial Arts Association, Fighters Association. Uh, I meet guys, speak with guys every day almost. top level guys who are still competing now
Mm.
and are demanding change in the sport.
Which
And
fighters are you allowed to
yeah,
name them all?
yeah, it would be a lot of different fighters that are competing today. I wouldn't name them. Yeah, I'll keep their privacy, and because a lot of turmoil in the sport right now, and with the monopoly, they can control things. Yeah, the way the sport's structured, one of the bad things about the way the sport's structured is that because the promoter controls the title and has exclusive contract, the managers work for the promoters now. They don't work for the athlete. They can't represent the athlete's interest. The managers are there to manage the athlete for the promoter. And if that manager is unable to manage that athlete, the athlete either the manager either has to get rid of the athlete, or the athlete has to basically get rid of their manager in
Oh,
order
okay.
to find one that the promoter will work with.
Yeah.
Right? It's crazy, yeah. But the promoter controls every aspect of the sport. If a referee makes a decision they know the promoter is not going to like, that referee is not going to get hired. Whereas,
Wow. Yeah.
whereas in boxing, who the referee is decided by the two boxers. In
Really?
MMA, yeah, in MMA, it's decided by the promoter.
So, how do you think they should be able to give more power back to the fighters?
They can't be allowed to use exclusive contracts. It should be like in tennis, where you should be able to compete for any title freely if it's controlled and owned by the promoter.
But, across different MMA organizations, would the pay affect that? Like, because different organizations pay different
The
fighters.
pay will change. The pay will go up because they will actually have to compete. They will have to pay the most to make sure the fighters are staying there to compete for them. But
Okay.
also the fighters, they wouldn't compete for just one organization. They wouldn't. The
Yeah.
titles have to be independent from the promoter. They can't use exclusive contracts.
And when you were fighting, which fight do you think you had which fight do you looking back on, do you think this was my best performance?
Probably Pele. Great fight, right? Or make fights against Renzo Gracie. Great fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you actually beat Henzo Gracie? Because that's like beating a Gracie at that time was, a big name to add onto your resume. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's yeah, fighting Renzo Gracie. Yeah, that was kind of another milestone in my career because when I was 16, I was taught by Hoist Gracie and Hickson Gracie,
You were
and
taught by him.
yeah,
Wow.
I got my training sessions in with them. They were big mentors and role models for me, in the sport of jiu-jitsu, especially Hickson, right? Big role model. He had, has a very similar body type to me, very similar approach,
Yeah.
and basically to one day be sitting across the corner, across the ring in the
Yeah.
other corner looking at Henzo and Hoist as his cornerman.
Mm.
I think even they knew and understood, wow, this guy has grown up. it
Yeah.
it had kind of a bit of an anime feel to it. You know?
Because your name, the Ronin, where did that nickname actually come from?
That name came from Japanese people, the Japanese fans. They
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 gave you
coined
that
that
name.
name. Yeah, they gave me that
Wow.
name. Yeah, I
And
remember it. Yeah, I remember. I remember it was, when they first mentioned it in magazines. I remember one Japanese person said, "You're a Ronin. You are a Ronin." I
do
said,
you know what it
"Okay."
meant at the time, or did you learn it over the years?
They taught me when they
Yeah.
told me that day. They told me what it meant. Mhm.
Wow.
And
So
yeah, I went in. And when I studied Japanese in university, I also learned what it meant.
So how much language do you actually speak then?
Oh, my Japanese is very rusty now, but you know, I don't speak any other language other than English very well now. You know, and but I understand linguistics and how language functions and so forth. So it helps. It helps with the understanding of a lot of things. I think it helps me interact with people culturally on a much much smoother level. I
Yeah,
am able to navigate cultures much better because I could understand better their intent or their intended meaning, just by body language and a few words I might pick up, and things like that, just by understanding linguistics and how language functions. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of you know my experience as an athlete too, traveling around the world and stuff while studying linguistics was also great. It was like it's like taking international class.
and where did the term Dragon Ball Jiu-Jitsu come from? Dragon Ball Z Jiu-Jitsu from?
Oh, that again was from Japanese fans,
Yeah,
and yeah, I remember even the one day training in a Shooto gym in Tokyo, and that was in Higashinomiya, a Shooto gym. We're all
yeah.
training, and in the ring, we were goofing around. I had tapped someone, and I got up and I did a fireball to him,
You
and
did
the
a
whole
fireball to
gym,
him.
yeah, and the whole gym said, "Ah, you should do that after your fight if you win." I was like, and then I said, "Really?" And then one of the guys said, "Promise, promise, you got to do it after your fight if you win." And I did it, and then it stuck.
Was that leading up to the Pat Miletich fight, or was that in
That was
Pride?
that was uh that was probably before the Miletich fight, possibly. Yeah,
Before the Miletich fight, or after the Miletich fight? When you actually
yeah,
fought him, because you did that iconic celebration.
yeah. But yeah, the whole Dragon Ball stuff, it was around the same time. Yeah, with yeah, the a lot of that stuff came from Japanese fans, but yeah, it would probably be after the Pat Miletich fight. Yeah.
So, you know, the fighters that you fought at that time, and type of fight that you were yourself. How well do you think you'd be able to compete with the current fighters in MMA nowadays
Well,
because
I
of how
think I'll
much the
do.
sport has evolved?
That's the thing. The sport isn't really evolving. The fighters are fighting the way the promoter wants to see them fight.
But what
The
about being more well-rounded?
the fighters are less well rounded
Really?
than they are. Yeah, the fighters are striking more because it's more entertaining, and if they're not more entertaining, they'll get cut by the promoter.
Wow. Okay. And back then,
Right?
what do you think they cared about? Because even back then, they were trying to get more viewership, to save the UFC because they were in a lot of debt back then.
Yeah, they were in a lot of debt because they were trying to establish a monopoly. They were in a lot of debt because they were trying to drive out other promotions and monopolize. They were in a
Yeah.
lot of debt because they were trying to sign every fighter to
Wow.
themselves and not allow anyone else to have them. They were in a lot of debt because they knew if they could get enough popularity and have enough fighters under exclusive contract, they would own the sport. They were in a
And
lot
how?
of debt because they were trying to buy their own sport and form a monopoly.
Wow.
That's how. That's the pattern. You go into a lot of debt to get a monopoly. It's like in the airline business. If my company, if there's only two airlines and they're both worth 500 million, one's going to go into a lot of debt buying the other one.
Yeah.
But after they've purchased the other one, guess what? They now have a monopoly. They'll make their 500 million back in a year, and then after that, their new company will be worth $5 billion. And that is exactly what happened to UFC. Went into a debt of $40 million, went in debt 40 million, came out of it, with 12 billion.
So how close do you think were to actually going bankrupt at the time?
They weren't going bankrupt. These
Do
are
you not
rich
think they would
people,
have,
man.
because they were about,
Yeah,
no.
no.
And you
The
were
40
around that.
million, 40 million to those guys, it was nothing. What matters is that they had it. What matters is that the athletic commission, in neglecting this duty, allowed them to have exclusive contracts. They yeah, they basically knew what they were doing, and how to form that monopoly. They knew they had a pathway to monopoly. So would they have run out of money, go bankrupt? They don't go bankrupt. They own casinos in Vegas and so forth long before long before they owned the UFC.
And
You know,
a couple last questions before we go. You fought in Pride, and when Pride was later shut down because of because it was found out that it was owned by the Yakuza, the Japanese
yeah.
mafia. When you were fighting at the time, did you know there was some shady connections?
Um, I think all of us, all the fighters knew, that the Japanese yakuza and so forth was kind of involved in promoting,
Wow. Really?
the fights and so forth. But and that's the thing when sports isn't regulated and like the way it's supposed to, you get these kind of things. But Pride was in Japan, and that's one country. There's a lot of different countries you can compete in. If every country had this own Pride, you know, athletes would be way better off than they are now.
Yeah.
Right?
So how involved did you know the mafia was when you were fighting in Pride?
I didn't get involved. If you meet people, you meet guys, you get introduced to you get introduced to someone, and they say, "Hey, he's number two boss in Tokyo." You shake their hand, and you say, "Hey, cool."
Oh, so you actually met him?
Yeah, you meet
Ah,
yakuza. Yeah, or we all did. You just meet them. They're there. They're there. They're there. They're like part of society.
oh, but like the high ranking ones that were actually behind the full thing.
It's a very fluid organization. I'm sure there are shows that I have been involved in and shows I weren't involved in that, it's Yakuza. Yeah. And they, they put their money into putting on promotions at the time. I'm sure
And
they still do.
one last question before we go. What advice do you have, for younger fighters competing in MMA today, or the younger generation that you'd like to pass on?
Um, Learn how your sport functions and how it's supposed to be regulated. Because the best thing for you is to compete. If you want to compete as an athlete and not be a clown and somebody's entertainer under exclusive contract where they have full control of your life, learn how to compete and allow your sport to compete. You know, uh, and also learn and study what's going on in boxing and how the UFC is trying to monopolize boxing, also, especially for boxers too. You know, if we can get competition back into our sport, free competition of athletes competing for titles, we're gonna have much brighter days ahead, and our sport will become a lot bigger. A lot of people think the sport is huge. The sport
Yeah,
is not huge. The monopoly is huge.
really.
Yeah, right. Do you know of any other big promoter? No.
I mean, there are a couple, but the
They're
UFC leads by quite a large margin.
no, the UFC puts on less than 5% of the fights that happen globally and make over 95% of the revenues globally.
And what advice do you have for the younger generation?
Again, get to know your sport, how it's regulated, and learn to read your contracts. And yeah, we need independent titles in the MMA. We need independent titles like sanctioning bodies do in boxing. People say, oh, sanctioned bodies are corrupt and so forth. Yes, there will always be corrupt people in sport, but it doesn't mean just because there are corrupt individuals, you get rid of proper regulation. Just because there are corrupt individuals doesn't mean you should get rid of then say, you know what, we don't need referees since everyone's corrupt anyways. Yeah, even referees are corrupt sometimes. Okay, so yeah,
Uh,
get to know your sport.
anyways, thank you so much, Carlos and Ronin
You're welcome.
Newton, for coming on my podcast, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'd love to have you on again in the future sometime.
Yes, we'll do it again for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Have a good day, guys.